Hello, everyone. This is the Catholic Esquire. So, we are continuing the series on red pilling, on theology of the body. And I know it's been a long time since I've done one of these shows on this series. And so, I just want to recap where we left off last time. In case you want to follow just the series, I am including the red pilling on theology of the body in a playlist to the channel so you can find just those episodes in one place, if that helps. So, just to recap, what we talked about was that it's the teaching of the church, the traditional teaching of the church, that the purpose of marriage, the ends of marriage, is the procreation and education of children. In the previous episodes, I showed you throughout tradition, from St. Augustine all the way up to Pius XII, that that's always been the teaching of the church. And it changed at Second Vatican Council. They didn't say procreation was not part of marriage. What they did was eliminate this hierarchy of ends in marriage. So instead of saying that the procreation education of children is the primary purpose of marriage, what they said is the procreation education of children is a purpose of marriage. What are other purposes of marriage, you may ask, that they just discovered at the Second Vatican Council? Well, just love. Love is love. Unity. Love and unity are purposes of marriage. Now, sadly, my friends, there's reasons why they did this, and we're going to see the underlying reason for that as this series continues. But what we're going to do today is I want to show you more support for this doctrine that has always been the doctrine and teaching of the church, unquestionably. That the primary purpose of marriage is the procreation of education of children. Today we're going to focus on the Old Testament so you can see where this doctrine manifests itself in the books of the Old Testament. And along the way today, you're also going to see some disturbing things. You're going to see the effect of translations in Bibles that are used. If you're familiar with biblical versions and translations, the New American Bible, the Revised Standard Version of the Bible, RSV, right, Revised Standard Version, and then we have the Douay Rheims. So that's based on the Latin Vulgate that we get from St. Jerome. There's significant differences in them. And these significant differences have a real impact on what we understand about the church's teaching and doctrine. And it's going to become very clear to you today as we go through the Old Testament. So let's go ahead and dive into the presentation. Of course, we're going to start at the very beginning in Genesis. And to be clear, as we go through, I will generally be using the Douay Rheims version, Latin Vulgate version of the scriptures, unless otherwise stated. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Beginning with Genesis 1:28, we're very familiar with the famous verse about increasing and multiplying. Here's an example where we're going to compare the translations. In the Douay Rheims, Genesis 1:28 says, "And God blessed them, saying, Increase and multiply, and fulfill the earth, and subdue it, and rule over the fishes of the sea, and the fowls of the air, and all the living creatures that move upon the earth." Now, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, they use the New American Bible. This is the version of the Bible that you'll get at the New Mass, the Novus Ordo Mass. It's different than the Latin Vulgate translation that you will get at the traditional Latin Mass, like I just read. The translation for Genesis 1:28 in the New American Bible says, quote, "God blessed them, and God said to them, Be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it. Have dominion over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all the living things that crawl on the earth." Essentially, it looks to be the same on the surface. Increase and multiply and fulfill the earth and subdue it. God is telling Adam and Eve, that this is what nature requires. It's not necessarily a strict command. Now, when we go to the commentaries, you're going to see a significant difference, however. The Douay-Rheims commentary says, referring to increase and multiply, this is not a precept, as some Protestant controvertists would have it, but a blessing, rendering them fruitful. For God had said the same words to the fishes and birds, who were incapable of receiving the precept. What the commentary there is explaining to you is that what appears to be a command, increase and multiply, that is based on nature. That is based on the way we are made as human beings, and we are inclined towards procreation. It is not a legal precept. It is not a legal command, as the Protestants would have you. And it's very important that they mention that in the Douay-Rheims commentary here. Again, we're going to see the impact of this as we move forward in this series. But I just wanted to point this out to you at this time, because in videos down the line, I'm going to come back to that, and I'm going to say, hey, remember when I talked about Genesis 1:28? The Protestants think increase and multiply is a precept, and it's not just a matter of nature. Okay, I will come back to this then. Now, the New American Bible Commentary from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops mentions nothing about precept. It actually says nothing at all. Of course, it doesn't controvert the Protestant commentaries. You're never going to see that, because now we're being very ecumenical. So it would be very unecumenical to criticize Protestant interpretations of the Bible. But they have a long explanation here of this. It's not even worth me going into or reading, but it doesn't mention anything about the fact that this is not a precept. And in fact, it sort of leads one to believe that it is precept, a specific command that the husband and the wife have a duty to procreate. That is not true. That is not what we mean when we say the primary purpose of marriage is the procreation of education and children. It does not mean there is a legal requirement to have children. Again, this will become more important as we move on. But let's move forward to Genesis 22:4, chapter 2:4. Now, it says there, shall be two in one flesh. This is another frequent reference. It comes up a lot in theology, the body studies. Let's compare the two versions. Douay-Rheims says, quote, wherefore a man shall leave father and mother and shall cleave to his wife, and they shall be two in one flesh. Okay? Now the New American Bible says, quote, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and the two of them become one body. Now here we see a difference in the translation. And if you read them carefully, they're actually really not the same now, are they? The Douay-Rheims says, and they shall be two in one flesh. The New American Bible says they become one body. In the traditional version, the man and the wife remain two, don't they? But they remain two in one flesh. That's the family. We create one family out of two, the husband and the wife. But strangely, in the New American Bible, it becomes the husband and the wife become one body. Why would this be the case, my friends? Remember at the beginning of this video when I said that those who promote the theology of the body come up with other purposes for the purposes of marriage? And one of them is unity. We substitute procreation of education of children as a primary purpose, and we substitute the unity of spouses as a primary purpose. They often point back to Genesis 2:4 to support that. Well, it becomes very convenient when you have a translation that happens to support the theology of the body theology, doesn't it? What do the commentaries to Genesis 2:24 say? Very interestingly, the traditional commentary, the Haydock commentary, says one flesh connected by the closest ties of union, producing children, the blood of both. Interesting. The New American Bible version talks about one body, literally one flesh. The covenant of marriage establishes kinship bonds of the first rank between the partners. Now, wait a second here. What's happening? What's happening here? Didn't Haydock just mention the union of the husband and wife? What does it say? The traditional commentary says one flesh connected by the closest ties of union, producing children, the blood of both. So you see the families created, right? When husband and wife come together and they produce children, they create a family, one family, that's the one flesh, with children who have the blood of both the husband and the wife. So the children are the product of the union of the husband and wife. Now that makes sense, and that makes sense when you read the translation as we just mentioned. But according to the New American Bible, you have one body. Remember they said one body? And it says, well, yes, literally one flesh. So they conflate this idea. And then they say, well, the covenant of marriage establishes kinship bonds of the first rank between the partners. So it's just talking about union here, the union of the spouses. Okay. And it's funny enough because I put this in here as well. The New American Bible also says, with respect to Genesis 2:18, which was a couple of verses before this one, where it talks about Eve was created to be Adam's helper. They had to throw in there here this little quip. Helper need not imply subordination, right? So that's going to be a reference to St. Paul later on, which we'll talk about later. I just wanted to put that in there to show you how these commentaries are very, very political, and they're designed to mislead the reader if one has a particular theological ideology that they want to get across. And what I'm telling you, my friends, is this New American Bible translation, the one from the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, is completely corrupted, because this is the kind of stuff they put in there, these little commentaries. But they're also getting the teaching wrong. So what we see here is the commentaries explain in the traditional version that the union of husband and wife has to do with the union for the purpose of producing children. The union is in the children that they produce. Whereas the New American Bible says the union is the husband and wife into one body and doesn't even mention children. And so now you can understand that that's consistent with what happened at Vatican II when I said that the primary purpose of marriage was changed. It was the entire ends of marriage were turned up on its head. And you can see it reflected in the commentaries of the Bible. All right, we're going to move on real quickly here. The blessing of children, as we said, it's not a precept, it's a blessing. It rears its head throughout the rest of the Old Testament. We see with Noah, and God blesses Noah and his sons, and he said to them, increase and multiply and fill the earth. So you see it's a blessing for Noah. For Abraham, I will increase thee exceedingly, and I will make nations of thee, and kings shall come out of thee. So again, we see another of this reference to an increase in the covenant God made with Abraham. Jacob, similarly, I am God Almighty. Increase thou and be multiplied. Another reference to Genesis, the first chapter. Nations and people of nations shall be from thee, and kings shall come out of thy thy loins. In the land which I gave to Abraham and Isaac, I will give to thee and to thy seed after. We should mention here Onan, Genesis 38. Now, Onan's its own separate topic. We're going to have to come back to that later. But I just want to mention it here, and it talks about he knowing that the children should not be his. This is Onan. When he went into his brother's wife, spilled his seed upon the ground, lest children should be born in his brother's name, and therefore the Lord slew him. because he did a detestable thing. Now, there's a lot of background here that we probably should get into, and it's not appropriate at this time. But the idea here was that Onan was supposed to marry his dead brother's wife and produce children with her. That was part of the uh, uh, Jewish tradition at the time. And what happened was Onan did not want to produce children with his brother's wife, and so he spilled his seed. Immediately, the Lord slew him. And the idea is that um, the purpose of marriage, again, here is for the procreation and an education of children. And Onan violated this, and it offended God very much. This is also an important passage for when we talk about contraception and NFP later. So we'll be coming back to Onan. I just wanted to mention it now. Leviticus also with Moses. I will look on you and make you increase. You shall be multiplied, and I will establish my covenant with you. Again, Leviticus 26:9. This reference to multiplying and a blessing and the covenant between Moses and God. So you see a common theme here, right, my friends? Now, let's get down to some brass tacks here. Okay. Beginning with Tobias 6:17. This is going to take a little explanation, my friends. So let's do it. So the background of this is that the man Tobias, he's also called Tobit. He was a very holy man, a descendant of Abraham, and a holy Jewish man. He sent his son, Tobias, on a mission to uh, Media, another town. And along the way, Tobias encounters the daughter of one of Tobit's relatives. And Tobias, also being a good, holy man, the son of Tobit, is accompanied by the archangel Raphael. Now, the problem with this Sarah, who he encounters, is that she had already had 7 husbands, and they all died. They all died the day of the wedding. So there seemed to be some sort of curse here going on. And, Tobias asks the archangel Raphael about this, saying, look, this lady had 700s before, 7 husbands before, and they all died. Why would I want to marry her? This was also a concern of Sarah's father, Raguel, who was the relative of Tobit. And he was saying, why would Tobias want to marry my daughter? I mean, the first 7 husbands were all struck down immediately. Well, St. Raphael gives an answer. In the book of Tobias 6:17, he says, for they who in such manner receive matrimony as to shut out God from themselves and from their mind, and to give themselves to their lust, as the horse and the mule, which have not understanding, over them the devil hath power. And so what the angel here is telling Tobias is that, look, those who receive matrimony for lustful reasons, in other words, to have relations with wives, not for the purpose of, of procreation, but to satisfy their own lusts. It's over those people that the devil hath power. But for those who accept matrimony for its primary purpose of having children and multiplying and procreation, the devil will not have power over them. And you're saying, well, how do you get all that from what I just read? Well, see the reference here to the horse and the mule. We all know that a horse and a mule cannot procreate. But at the same time, they do come together at times, but it's completely sterile union. And so Raphael's given an example of the horse and a mule as a couple who may want to come together, but not for procreative purposes, or not have procreative purposes. And what he's saying here is that this is the purpose of the marriage. The purpose of marriage is procreation. And for those who reject it, perhaps like Sarah's previous 7 husbands, over them the devil hath power, and they were struck down. And so the purpose here is Raphael is saying, don't worry, because you're going to have the proper purpose of marriage with Sarah. You will be fine. You will be fine. Now, moving forward in the same book, Tobias, in chapter 622, and again, we're here reading from the Douay-Rheims version of this. Quote, "And when the 3rd night is past, you shall take the virgin with the fear of the Lord, moved rather for love of children than for lust, that in the seed of Abraham thou mayest obtain a blessing in children." So again, Raphael is instructing Tobias here that you're going to wait 3 days before you come together as husband and wife, and you're going to be moved for the love of children rather than lust. Again, that matches up with what we just read about in the prior passage. And may you be blessed with children. So again, this is very consistent with this notion of blessing, of increase, multiply, blessing, and how this is favorable to God. This continues. Now, what I want to point out as well are differences in translations. Okay, Tobias 8:4-9. Let's look at some comparisons here between the Douay-Rheims and the version that the New Catechism post-Vatican II uses. And I want to show you an example of how they change translations in order to change the meaning. In the Douay-Rheims version, it says, "Thou madest Adam of the slime of the earth, and gavest him Eve for a helper. And now, Lord, thou knowest that now not for fleshly lust do I take my sister to wife, but only for the love of posterity, in which thy name may be blessed forever and ever." So this is a prayer of Tobias, right? It's a calling to God, and he's saying, I'm taking Sarah as my wife, not for lust, not for fleshly lust like her other husbands, but for the love of posterity, love of children. That's why we're getting married. Now, this is in Tobias 8:4-9. What does the version that we read about in the New Catechism say? The New American Bible Version. But I emphasize that it's also put into the Catechism as well, because this is the new teaching. This is the theology of the body. This is the changing in what is being taught about the purpose of marriage, my friends. So that's why I emphasize it. This is in the New Catechism. So those who are just coming into the church read this and say, oh, they're going to get a different version of this than what's in the Douay-Rheims. And it's a significant difference. I'll read it. It says, quote, "You made Adam and Eve for him. You made his wife Eve as a helper and support. From the two of them, the race of mankind has sprung. You said, it is not good that the man should be alone. Let us make a helper for him like himself. I now am taking this kinswoman of mine, not because of lust, but with sincerity. Grant that she and I may find mercy, and that we may grow old together." Wait a second here. Let's compare that. In the Douay-Rheims version, Tobias says, "I take my sister to wife, but only for the love of posterity, in which thy name may be blessed forever and ever." See, it's very consistent with what we read about in Genesis. Remember those blessings, the blessings of children, and there's always a blessing associated with children. And he says, I'm taking Sarah as my wife, not for lust, but for posterity. What does the new version say? It says, I'm now taking this kinswoman wine, not because of lust, but with sincerity. Grant that she and I may find mercy and that we may grow old together. Now, wait a second. That completely changes the meaning. The reference to posterity or children is completely taken out of the new version. It's replaced, instead of posterity, it says, but with sincerity. There's no reference to children at all. And in the Dewey Rames version, it then goes on and makes this reference to being blessed forever and ever, which, as we saw, was always connected to having children. That reference to being blessed forever and ever is taken out. And it's replaced with this statement that says, so that we can find mercy and grow old together. That's classic theology of the body right there in the New Catechism. But they're literally changing the translation of the Bible to fit it. This is astonishing, my friends. And when I read this and I saw this, I'm like, this is insane. This is insane. Not only are they changing the doctrine at Vatican II, they're going back and reworking the translations of the Bible to meet the new doctrine that they're putting forth at Vatican II. This is a perfect example of it. Tobias, chapter 8, 4 through 9. One other thing I want to mention, my friends, about this, the previous sections of Tobias, 6:17, 6:22. Remember the horse and the mule reference? Remember that? We don't want sterile sex, right? Remember the horse and the mule? That's not in the new translations. That's not in the New American Bible. If you compare the New American Bible version of Tobias, especially with the references to the children and the purpose of marriage, they're all gone. They're all taken out. They're not there. You won't find a reference to horse and mule in Tobias. In fact, they took out so much they had to renumber some of this stuff, so it makes it hard to compare and contrast the new version of Tobias to the old version of Tobias. And strangely, all of these references to the primary purpose of marriage being procreation and education of children are not there. And if you don't believe me, get a Revised Standard Version of the Bible, I don't care what version you use, and compare it to the Douay Rheims version. You're going to see tremendous differences. And the Tobias 6:17, as I mentioned, Tobias 6:22, these references to children being the purpose of the marriage are taken out. They're gone. And as I mentioned in Tobias 8, 4 through 9, the translation is completely changed where posterity is removed and replaced with this notion of sincerity. This is shocking. Now, you may be asking, well, like, how can this happen? Is this allowed? Well, let me remind everybody of something. The Council of Trent addressed biblical translations, and it said, quote, but if anyone receive not as sacred and canonical the said books entire with all their parts, as they have been used to be read in the Catholic Church, and as they are contained in the old Latin Vulgate edition, and knowingly and deliberately contemn the traditions aforesaid, let him be an anathema. The Council of Trent taught that the Latin Vulgate is the preferred and best translation that Catholics should be using when they're reading scriptures. Okay? I'm just telling you that. You can always be safe with the Douay Rheims version of scripture. Council of Trent promises us that. Now, what I will tell you is, when you bring this stuff up to the modernists, what they're going to say is, well, that doesn't mean we can't use other translations. Didn't Pope Pius XII talk about that? And he did. And Pope Pius XII did say we can use other translations, that the Council of Trent did not mean that there could never be any other translations. But what Pope Pius XII also said is that you can always rest assured in the accuracy and the truthfulness of St. Jerome's translation, the Latin Vulgate edition. Okay? So, when you see these differences in the translations, just remember that. And just remember what the Second Vatican Council did with regard to the doctrine. And when you go back and look at the translations, match up the translations to the changing in the doctrine. So just to conclude, my friends, I know this was a lot today. The purpose of today's videos was just to show you in the Old Testament that the doctrine that the primary purpose of marriage is, in fact, the procreation and education of children. It is not unity. It is not love. It is not the stuff you will hear about in theology of the body. It is children. That's the primary purpose, okay? And I showed it to you in the Old Testament today. I compared the Genesis chapters 1 and 2. I compared the two translations and the commentaries that were very different. You could see the difference in the emphasis there. I showed you the blessings from Noah to Jacob to Abraham to Moses, and all this connection of blessing with children in a marriage. And then we get down to the Old Testament and Tobias, which, by the way, isn't in the Protestant Bibles at all. In the book of Tobias or Tobit, we see significant changes in the translations of the Bible in order to accommodate the new teaching, supposed teaching of the theology of the body. Because if you read the Douay-Rheims version, it's very, very clear that the purpose of marriage is procreation. St. Raphael, the archangel, teaches Tobias that. We see that in the prayer that Tobias makes to God on his wedding night. It's all right there. My friends, this was a lot. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being patient with me. I hope it's useful. I welcome any comments in the comment section to the video. I do my best to try to respond. I hope this was helpful. Thank you for listening. Pray for restoration of the traditional Latin Mass. Pray for the restoration of Holy Mother Church so that the modernists who are affecting the hierarchy will be removed. Thank you for listening, and God bless.